This is an audio production of Hunter of the Setting Sun by N.N. Shepherd. Music by Josiah Fursanetti. Cover art by Levi Bushnell. Editing by Josiah Fursanetti and Levi Bushnell. Read by the author. Hunter of the Setting Sun. Episode 1. The rain couldn't wash away her image, and Emmond rode on. The mountain path ran with rivers of dark water, turning it into an unstable and shifting monster. The road curved back and forth as it rose to the mountain peak, sometimes showing what would have been wondrous vistas had there been no storm. Not that it mattered. Emmond was not riding for the views. His heart pounded in his ears, and though the rain soaked him through, robbing his fingers of warmth, he hardly noticed. The hollow ache thudded deeper and deeper in his chest with each moment passed, each minute away from his home in the valley below. For a moment, he was there again, seeing it all for the first time, his heart stopping and breath leaving his lungs, the mountain road disappearing from his vision, and the body taking its place, hanging from the terrible rope at the entrance to the town. It's not real. She's not gone. Whisper tossed his head and let out a high whinny in the deepening gloom. The sound pulled Emmond from his vision, the hanging corpse replaced with the approaching cliff and tumbling darkness beyond. He quickly righted the reins, steering his horse back toward the center of the road. Emmond trusted Whisper nearly more than anyone, and even as he gripped the reins and focused on the road, he knew the steed wouldn't have taken him off the edge. Still, Emmond forced his thoughts to align. It was no time to lose focus. They turned up and up, rivers thinning to streams beneath the blur of hooves as they approached the peak of Star Top Mountain and the monastery that stood there. He had never been to the building, but knew it now as his only hope. He prayed he was not wrong, prayed with the weight of blood. The mountain path leveled out some and pushed inward, turning away from the view and toward the center of the peak. Leafless trees and dry brush lined the path, the muddy ground turning sporadically into dark stones, raising the volume of Whisper's hooves as they sped along. No more was there a dull thundering echoed by the spray of water. It was replaced by a rhythmic, clipping drumbeat that rang through the storm clouds above, echoing in the forest and bringing Emmond and his gray horse to the tall white walls and the black gate of Cathris Monastery, rising from the rain like another mountain, this one of white and black, standing in silence against the natural world. Emmond slowed Whisper in his skid just before the Blackwood gate, measuring his balance against the steed to ensure neither man nor beast fell to their backs in the muddy road. He cleared the saddle in a leap and sprang to the black gate, pounding on it as loudly as he could with the strength born of agony. "I know you are there! Answer me!" he yelled into the Blackwood surface. He shouted on, stepping back from the door for a moment to look up at the white wall and the tip of the tower beyond, looking for any light or sign of life. He knew the place was occupied, still holding students of the divine, for they came down to the valley and the town of Dara from time to time, giving word to the servants there, the leader of the town church, the guide of the people, and the man who, a square of light, flashed a few feet from where Emmond pounded, then snuffed out as a face appeared, blocking out the glow. The man's features were hidden as the light danced and flickered around his head, showing an eyeball or a corner of a chin or an ear, the specifics flowing in and out of shadow. Emmond dashed to the side and put his face to the iron bars that protected the porter window from the outside. "Where is he?" Emmond shouted into the shadowed face. The man pulled back from Emmond's shout, letting the light behind him bathe his face in visibility. He was young, though Emmond knew age was difficult to determine with those who served the potter, for even as his face bore no wrinkles, the knowing look in the man's eyes and the broad comfort of his smile told of an age far beyond Emmond's first thought. "Young man, whom do you seek?" "Relvin," Emmond snapped. "Horace Relvin, servant of our town, servant of Dara and the whole valley. He killed—" "What is your name?" the man interrupted. "I would pass on your—" It was Emmond's turn to interrupt. "Emmond Sarren," he nearly shouted, rivers of rain torrenting down his face. "I must have entrance to your grounds. I must find Relvin." "He's not here, I'm afraid. It is his time of returning, as you must surely know." The smile still covered his face, but it was beginning to lose its easy look. Emmond slammed his palm against the door with one hand and reached up to grab the bars of the window with the other. "Master Samuel saw him riding up the mountain path. Saw him yesterday. Where else is there to go up the mountain but to this monastery?" There was a faint break in the man's smile, but it didn't depart for long. "Our path of this mountain is only a small divergent path from the main road. Surely you know that the main way leads west to Harbin Point, on the edge of the flatlands, and surely you know—" "He did not go west," Emmond snapped. "He wouldn't go west. He would come here for refuge." The smile widened even more, and Emmond was starting to see it as fake rather than practiced kindness. Refuge from what? From his crime. The man tilted his head just enough to make Emmond want to reach through the bars and choke him. "And what crime would that be?" he asked. Emmond could barely force even a small measure of calm into his voice. He killed my wife. The fire was warm and the soup smelled of potatoes and radishes, and the men were all kind and soft-spoken, but Emmond hated it all. This is only for kindness, to give you a moment from the rain and allow your brave steed a measure of rest. Do not take this for any admission, and do not assume freedom to our monastery. We are not allowing a search of the grounds. The man who spoke had named himself Sage Benjamin. He wasn't the man who Emmond had met at the gate. That man was taller and with darker hair, and after leading Emmond to what appeared to be a study hall, had disappeared down a hallway. The man who called himself Benjamin seemed to be the leader of the monastery, but it was many years since Emmond pretended to understand the workings of the clay servants, those emissaries of the potter, divine creator of all the world. "What have you to hide?" Emmond asked, not touching the soup that steamed before him, food that he had attempted to reject as the men brought him into the monastery. He only wished to search the grounds, not indulge in a meal. Sage Benjamin was dressed in the same white robe as the other men in the room, a garment so heavy and misshapen that Emmond could imagine the servants enjoyed much comfort. The man's hair was short and gray, the close haircut another commonality among the men. The room itself was large, with a low ceiling, warm and hot from the fireplaces at both ends, and round tables littered with books and pages filled the space, all in various states of robed occupants reading or watching Emmond in silence. The crinkling of scrolls and pages turning in tomes, mixed with the sweet and sour smells of pipe smoke and amber drinks, gave the space a comforting feel. "There's nothing to hide, but much to protect," the man before Emmond said with a smile. "How are we to know your story is true, one we can allow into our halls?" "And what story is this, that a servant of the craftsman has killed your wife?" A man across the room spoke. The loose mockery in his words spiked a flame within Emmond, but he forced himself to bite his tongue and leave the distant man alone. Before he had a chance for a sharp reply, Sage Benjamin spoke again. "Please, would you tell us your tale?" Emmond pushed his chair back and stood up quickly, his eyes scanning the room for any of the men who might stop him. "I have not the time. I must search these walls and bring Relvin to end." "You are admitting to seeking the death of one of the potter's creations, and a man who is, furthermore, one of his servants? Would you admit this so easily?" Emmond didn't hide the hatred in his eyes or words. "I will find him and exact his death." The lead sage leaned back in his bench and shrugged his shoulders. "You will not find a murderer here, young man, for none exists, even were you to search, which you will not do." "And who's to stop me? A group of old scholars?" Emmond looked about the room, meeting the eyes on him, measuring the weight of their stares, measuring who would act if he were to strike out. The short knife at his belt felt ready for loosening, and he knew where his longbow and spear lay bound in Whisper's saddle, just outside the closed door in the covered courtyard. These men were not warriors. They were students of old texts and old stories. Emmond was a hunter. "Do not go against the potter's calling," the sage warned. "You would not find a pleasant end." "I care little for my own end," Emmond returned. "Tell us of your troubles," another man said, the words without so much of the false kindness and hidden humor that he had heard so far. He gestured to the chair Emmond had recently vacated, and there was something in the man's face that at once warmed and admonished him. Perhaps this was not a moment for haste or violence, but instead a moment for words and decorum. If these men were bound to truth, they would hear Emmond's story and give Relvin up. Emmond breathed deeply and shook his head, staring into the fire. Her face swam out to him, pale and lifeless, lips and eyes swollen, her entire head blossomed with a swelling. She looked so ruined, hanging upside down by her feet, the rope tied around her ankles and up to the sweeping crossbeam at the entrance to the town. Hands dangling at the end of her long arms, swinging free from the sockets, and the wound in her stomach open and dark with dried blood, the darkness running down her naked torso and to the side of her face, coating her once brown hair dark and sickly red-black. Oliver was in his eyes as he stared at the fire, thinking of the hours before as he rode down along the east road from Wythe, hoping to arrive home before the rain fell. "I was hunting in the Northlands," he started, not able to look away from her face in the fire as he sank once more into the chair. His voice was low and small, all the rage melted out. "North of Wythe, the forests there. Bears are slowing for the year due to the coming cold. Preparing for hibernation," he explained with a painful smile. "It matters not. I returned home to find her hung from the entrance arch by her ankles, naked with a spear wound in her stomach, her head swollen and gray, her hair coated in dried blood. No birds had gotten to her yet, so it could only have just happened, and if I had just been back a day sooner—" He paused and noticed that the fire had blurred in his eyes, his vision swimming in tears, though her face remained. "Eva," he whispered, trying to replace the face he saw upside down and swollen with a smiling, beautiful one that had kissed him goodbye 2 weeks before when he left for the hunt. Emmond continued. "She was dead, that was certain. I climbed the rigging lines and cut her down." He absently traced his fingers along the rope burns on his palms, torn there from sliding down the line with the weight of his wife. There was a man hanging as well, his face bloated and a hole in his naked side the same as Eva's. He had already been cut down and was surrounded by mourners, and I carried my wife away from them and laid her on the road, in the dirt where only refuse belongs. I held her, watching her eyes, waiting for her to breathe again and smile at me and say, "Welcome home." Emmond wiped at his face with the back of his hand and turned from the fire to stare at Sage Benjamin. They told me it was Relvin the servant who had found them both and killed them there in the street. No one stopped him, those that saw. It was righteous judgment for sin, and she was taken without any last word from me. Then your man of God fled. "A grisly tale," Sage Benjamin said carefully. "What sin?" Emmond shook his head, the vision of Eva slipping away, giving him more sadness and more clarity at once. "Does it matter? Is there a sin deep enough to avoid trial? The rule of our potter is perfect and whole, dealing judgment upon those who betray what is right." The man's eyes remained unflinching as he spoke, unmoving as Emmond asked, "You would accept this murder as justice?" Benjamin spread his arms wide in another shrug, but only achieved half the motion. "It greatly depends upon the sin committed." "My wife is dead," Emmond managed, fighting the breaking in his chest. "Dead! Do you not hear me? Dead!" He shouted this last word and stood from the chair, bumping the table and spilling the soup bowl across the wood. He knew the sin, knew what they had said, and hanging naked next to a naked dead man spelled out plainly enough what the crime was purported to be. But Emmond could not let his mind go to condemning her. He could not hate her. There was no closure, no look in her eyes, no seeing the betrayal there for himself. If she had slept with another man, that was something he must reckon with. But she was dead, and that was more. He could only allow one hurt to overcome at a time. "If you will not tell me where he hides, I will find him myself, and there will be none who stand in my way." Emmond's hand fell to the handle of his short knife, hidden in his hunting cloak. Instantly, arms grabbed him from behind, holding him tight with more strength than he imagined the old men could possess. There had always been curious stories about the true nature of the workers of the potter. Sage Benjamin was up and standing in front of him, the kind smile gone from his face. It wasn't a mean look that replaced it, but one of stern resolve. "You will return to Dara, and you will not be given..." Emmond's words may as well have been arrows for the velocity with which they left his mouth. "I know he came here. I know it." He took a step forward, forcing movement against the hands that held him, but suddenly his legs felt weak. There were no more tears in his eyes, but his vision remained cloudy, and before he could speak again, he was falling to his knees in the study hall. A shadow of the sage swam over him, and as Emmond lost sight entirely, he wondered if they would kill him too. Before he lost awareness, he wondered what poison they could have given him and how. He hadn't even tried the soup. Emmond dreamed of Eva. She crawled to him and he pulled the blankets over them both as she curled against his side, moving as though she were burrowing in against him, trying to fill every space between them. He held her tight, smoothing his hands along her back and side, feeling the warmth that matched his own. He didn't speak and she didn't either, content to lay with the other in the comforting stillness beyond the waves of sharing love, basking on a peaceful shore at the end of their journey. Their breathing stilled and their pulse slowed, settling as one, holding to each other and keeping nothing between them. There was no sleeping, for sleep would steal the moment. Instead, they shared the desire to maintain forever as one. Finally, she whispered something to him, pulling him from his thoughts of her, his love and care for the only woman he had known, and the only woman he wished for. He muttered, softly as not to disturb the calm. "Is Rem old enough?" He thought for a moment, putting together her question and filling in the parts unasked. "Is their son old enough for the hunt?" He snorted quietly and felt her become stiff next to him. "He's a boy," he said. "Must he always remain so in your eyes?" "In my eyes?" She slid her arm away and pushed herself up, looking down at him. Her free hand traced a gentle finger along his chin. "He longs to hunt with you. He longs to swim in the river and chase girls." Her smile was coy. "You chased this girl once. I was not 10. You were not 10 when you caught me, but I saw your younger stares." He looked away from her and stared at the ceiling, low and sealed doubly against the coming winter cold. He would depart for his bear hunt in 2 days, and he planned to take no one with him save Whisper. "He is not capable of hunting?" "Perhaps if we were hunting beavers," he answered. She turned his chin toward her, pulling his eyes down from the ceiling. "He does not want to hunt beavers. He does not choose. I am his father." He said it more harshly and loudly than he wanted, and felt her tense more, perhaps even sliding away from him. He held her tight, allowing no room for departing. "We must all learn from the beginning," he said it more kindly. He pulled her down to him and kissed her, softly and then hard, gentle and firm, feeling her warm to him again. "Bears are not easy," he said when they pulled apart. "I would not return home with the corpse of a boy along with those of the bear." "You would keep him safe," she said. She believed it fully. He could hear that. "I will wait until his safety is balanced on himself and not solely on me." She shook her head as it lay on his chest, but said no more. Not for a moment, at least. "You are good," she whispered finally, her warm breath tickling the hairs on his skin. "None are good." Her hand moved beneath the blankets and found his, and he gripped her tightly, anticipating. "You are good to me," she said. He kissed her forehead. He held her close, felt her warmth, woke up, weeping. It was a small, square room in the ground, cold and surrounded by dirt on 2 sides. The other sides were walled off by iron bars, black and misshapen, forming a cell. It was the town jail of Dara, a small, squat building built mostly beneath ground level, a place that Emmond had never thought he would find himself. There was a smell of wet earth, moldy and old, and a continual dripping came from his right, somewhere in the dark. He wondered why the room wasn't completely flooded with the rain they had received, but he supposed there must be some sort of drainage to keep the cells from filling up and drowning whoever might be kept there. The dream of Eva had faded and was replaced by the gruesome, swollen face of a dead woman that hung from a wooden arch, a woman who couldn't possibly be his wife, the woman whom he wished to see more than anyone in the land. Pushing himself into a sitting position against the cold earthen wall, Emmond looked about the small underground room, trying to peer into the semi-darkness. A small window across from him outside the iron bars allowed a faint gray light within, though it showed little of any space outside of his bars. A shuffling sound could be heard further across from him, past the gray light, hidden in the lower darkness. Then, a voice. "He's dead." Emmond recognized the pain, for it matched his own. The voice was that of a woman, broken and beaten in spirit. In the dark across from him she was invisible, but an entire story showed in those two words. "Who was he?" Emmond asked, finding a hollow emptiness to his voice. "My husband. My love." Emmond turned himself forward and then pushed himself to his feet, not feeling weak or tired, but moving slowly and groggily anyway. He crossed a small distance to the metal bars and gripped them, feeling their cold dampness. The dripping sound to his right still continued, echoing constantly in the dark. "Why did they cast you here?" Emmond asked. The shuffling moved again, and then he barely saw her face peer out of the darkness across from him. Pale and dirty, an aura of fair hair wisped about her face, catching the smallness of light. Her eyes were blue, but a gray blue and so worn and old in her face that surely they couldn't belong to her. "I attempted to kill the High Sage," she said distantly, as though it were a memory from years ago. "This is all his fault." Emmond moved along the iron bars until he found the seam where the gate was, and tried pushing against it to see how secure the lock was. The iron door swung outward easily, though not without a groaning protest, and Emmond just stood for a moment, staring at nothing in the dark, surprised that he was free, surprised there was no lock at all. He gathered himself, inhaled deeply of the musty air, and felt his way around the edge of the metal bars, and then turned to go back to where the woman still stood. "This place is old," she said in the darkness. "I have never seen locks upon the stalls." Emmond shook his head, trying to understand through the haze in his mind. "Why place us here, dangerous criminals as we are?" He intended dry humor with the words, but they sounded hollow and honest in the earthen chamber. "They are proud," she said, swinging open her own door. "We mean nothing to them in any sense of danger. This place is only for holding those who drink too heavily and will awaken gently in the morning. We are being treated no different." "Come," Emmond said, waiting for her to shuffle to the opening in the dark. Then he walked on, eyes wide and searching, though there was nothing to see, his hands outstretched and waving back and forth slowly, trying to keep them in his path. He met more metal bars and moved about them, walking through the puddles, felt water drip down on him, but kept moving slowly around until his feet kicked something and he felt stairs instead of a wall. The woman had taken a hold of the back of his hunting coat and followed him all the way. "Stairs," he cautioned before advancing upward. They exited out into the night sky, the center of the small town of Dara, Emmond's hometown for much of his adult life. He turned about slowly, catching his bearings, seeing the houses and buildings and the select lights that flickered about. The rain was no more, and a thin strip of moonlight was visible and then hidden beyond the passing filter of clouds. "I was at the monastery." Emmond paused before continuing along the dark street. "Did you eat or drink anything they gave you?" Emmond turned to the woman and found he could see her better in the faint light from outside. She looked as though she had spent more than just one night in the partially buried jail. "The clay servants," the woman explained. "They have a way with trickery and secrecy. It was a drink for me." Emmond nodded but said nothing, remembering the soup the men in white had offered him. "I neither ate nor drank," he said. The woman shrugged and walked on. "Perhaps they have poison in their touch. I cannot speak to every facet of their trickery." Emmond had nothing to say to this, for there seemed to be some trickery afoot. For a moment he was awake and sharp and ready to fight his way through the men, and the next he was sliding to the floor with his vision and consciousness fading. How much of the sages and servants were a mystery? Emmond pushed the questions away and caught up to the wife of Henrik as they neared their destination. Lights burned bright in the largest house in the small village, that of the mayor, and Emmond could easily see the 6 white horses that stood outside the tying post. Emmond sprinted up the steps to the house and pushed in through the doorway, blinded for a moment by the bright light. He bumped into a suit of armor standing silent and motionless to the side of the entryway, armor that the mayor had once worn in his glory days long before he moved to the small town. Voices quickly stopped as Emmond passed the armor, but he followed the memory of sound and found the group of men standing before the large fireplace, their coats hanging on the backs of plush chairs, long stem pipes in their hands, the white robes pristine in the firelight. He searched their faces but did not find the man he wished for, the murderer whom he hunted. "My wife is dead," Emmond started. "I seek restitution." "Do not suffer an adulterer to live," one of the men in white robes said, a near musing tone to his words. I'm sure you did not know of your wife and her unfaithfulness, but in light of this knowledge, surely you cannot deem to believe our servant was in the wrong." "Scribe Poland, please," Sage Benjamin said. "Emmond, there's nothing to be done." The mayor spoke with a kindness that Emmond believed. He walked from the group and stood before the hunter. His beard was unkempt, and his hair, usually well cared for, seemed to have just been beneath a misshapen hat for hours. He wore a fine red doublet and black riding pants, though neither were adjusted properly. It all betrayed a hasty dressing. "They found them together, your wife and Henrik Alguaine. Middle of the day, as though there was nothing to hide. Emmond, I'm sorry." Emmond had heard this before, as he lay there with Eva's bloated head in his lap, asking the others what had happened and why his wife was dead. Henrik Alguaine was a farmer, a man who married one of the daughters of June Olek and helped run the land after the old man passed on several years back. Emmond didn't know enough to know which daughter he had married, though a small bit of logic told him it was the woman he had met in the cell. The door to the large house banged open and all heads turned to see the tattered and dirty woman push inside, her right arm flailing out for balance and coming to rest on the shining suit of armor. It rattled on a stand, and the mayor took a step past Emmond, but stopped as the woman righted herself and walked on. Emmond then realized that the foul, rotten smell wasn't just from the damp cell, but from her mouth and the spirits she must have drowned herself with. He could see her more clearly now, see the mud and rips in her dress, the dirty black shawl that barely hung on her shoulders, and her bare feet, bare and black with filth, leaving tracks on the rug. "Where's my husband? Where's Henrik?" And Emmond from a day before would have been the first to her side, helping her stand and trying to calm her drunken speech. That Emmond would have felt broken and destroyed at the thought of a young woman losing her man, at the knowledge that he had been taken from her so quickly and without her protest. But now he stood there in the drawing room, watching her stumble against the wall, feeling the same brokenness that she felt, with only a bit more equilibrium. "Catriona, please, it's a wonder you're standing," the mayor said, and actually took another step toward her, albeit an apprehensive one. Then he called for a maid. The girl came quickly and whispered kindly to the wife of Henrik, the farmer, helping her along in a slow shuffling walk, away from the drawing room and out of view. "Where is Servant Relvin?" Catriona called behind her as she was led off. Emmond turned back and stared at the men in white, one after the other, letting the widow's words hang in the air as thin as the smoke from their pipes. "He is not near," Benjamin answered. "As we told you on the mountain, he has traveled west to Harbin Point. Every half year the servants must journey to the nearest place of ascension to pray to the potter, to intercede on behalf of all. Then, the time of returning will bring each servant to their monastery, and they will once again serve in their sector. Servant Relvin is simply following his duty to the potter." "Then he is a week early," Emmond pointed out. "You are not the only ones with access to the seasons, the only ones who can read and understand the stars. Relvin is a week early for his ascension." The sage smiled. "The journey to Harbin Point is long." Emmond stared at the man, stared hard, searching his eyes, trying to measure out the truth and the lies. Which was which? What was really being said? Did Horace Relvin flee, or did he follow the path of his holy duty? And what more did Sage Benjamin know? She was there again in his mind, but not dead, alive and smiling at him. Emmond felt the pain again, replacing the anger, wishing his mind would pick one feeling to remain in the forefront, rather than bouncing back and forth between the two. It was too much to hold on to both. And his sons and daughter, they were there too, in his mind, filling his vision, all of them alive and well, and he knew what he must do. He forced himself to refocus, and looked only to the mayor, ignoring the men in white robes. "They will not help me," he said. "They will defend their own so as not to betray their faith. Their lies and trickery have stopped me enough. I must help myself." "Emmond, you cannot mean to go after the servant." He nodded, his jaw set. He nearly turned away then to leave the house, but a quick thought marked his mind. He stepped around one of the sitting chairs and stood in front of Sage Benjamin. The man was taller than Emmond, though thinner and without the bound muscles built by years of physical labor. There was a white bandage on the man's neck, hidden before by his robe, but visible up close. A faint pink showed through the center of it. "I cut Eva down, and she lay in the road with her mother as I took Whisper to the mountain," Emmond started. "You have taken her to the church?" The man didn't break eye contact, even though he seemed on the verge of it. He held his ground. "A death and the following actions thereof fall under the hands of the church. It is the duty of the clay servants. Upon bringing you back to this valley, we gathered the body and placed it in the church." "Give me her body," Emmond said coolly. Benjamin shook his head, a fraction of a motion. "It is our duty to administer any post-living rites, but you will not bury her because of her sin," Emmond cut him off. Here he looked away, and a touch of color met his cheeks. "Those who have sinned in such a way should be drawn and burned." "Then you will give her to me." Emmond looked back at Emmond, opening his mouth, but said nothing. Emmond's words were barely an audible threat in his throat. "If you keep her, may God curse you." Anger now touched the sage's face. "You do not know what you speak. You will not help me find Relvin. At least give me this." "Where will you take it?" Emmond paused, holding his breath to still the anger. He was solemnly aware of how outnumbered he was in the room, and uncertain of what more tricks the men possessed. She will be taken to a place of privacy, away from hidden eyes. There was a long pause, and none of the other men cut in, though Emmond was waiting for it. Finally, Sage Benjamin spoke. We will not come for the body before 2 days are up. If it is not found by then, we will assume some form of divine decay, which might presume the infinite guilt of the deceased. I care little for your guilt. The potter may not be on your side. Emmond restrained himself, but spoke in a measured whisper. I will find the man who killed my wife, and God will be on my side then. He raised a palm and touched it to the man's heart, holding it there without strength or pressure, only making the gesture. The white robes behind him stirred, but Sage Benjamin raised his hand to hold them back. Swear on your life, on the potter, that Relvin is not in the monastery. The man didn't break his eyes from Emmond. I swear it. May the potter strike you down if you lie. Yes. Say it, Emmond shouted in his face. May God strike me down. His words were a whisper. The color had faded from the sage's face, but his gaze held. There was remarkable resilience there that a small, distant, and historic part of Emmond admired. And you swear that he is on the road to Harbin Point to fulfill his ascension? Here, Benjamin looked away. Emmond took a hold of his jaw and pulled his face back, his former fear of contact entirely gone. Tell me! If he lives with no guilt, he has gone to Harbin Point. He would be here otherwise. If you are wrong, if I am wrong, you can unseat every stone in my monastery. Emmond let go of his chin and stepped back, a small half-step just to give them space. For your sake, may God find your words true. Emmond turned and strode from the house, not paying attention to the widow and the maid sitting together in an adjacent room, and not noticing the mud stain on the silver suit of armor by the door. He stepped out into the night and turned toward his home. This has been an audio production of Hunter of the Setting Sun by N.N. Shepherd. Music by Josiah Fursanetti. Cover art by Levi Bushnell. Editing by Josiah Fursanetti and Levi Bushnell. Read by the author. Tune in next time for another episode of Hunter of the Setting Sun.